Let's try to get rid of some of the clutter underneath the aquarium stand. Hello everyone, ReeferGil here. Something I knew was a must for this next build was to remove as many power strips and Apex equipment from underneath the tank stand and place it into its own dedicated cabinet. Removing as much of the equipment out from underneath the stand will get the electronics away from the water and the humidity that builds up underneath the tank stand. Removing everything away from the sump will be safer and eliminate the chances of ruining electronic components due to water damage. Having the electronics in a dedicated cabinet will make wire management much easier to organize. The mess of wires I once accepted as being part of the reef keeping hobby will be no more. There are a wide variety of ways to mount your equipment, from using simple plywood to extremely elaborate displays. And another popular method would be to purchase something at a low cost, say from IKEA, and modify that piece of furniture to fit your needs for an Apex stand. Ultimately, the decision on how to mount your equipment is entirely up to you. You may not give two hoots about where your equipment is mounted so long as it's secure and functional, and that's perfectly okay. But if you're like me and you want to unclutter your sump area, then a mounting option like the ones I've discussed are for you. As I mentioned in other videos, I'm fortunate to have a friend whose family owns a custom cabinetry shop. I provided them with my plans and they built me this cabinet made out of 3/4 inch maple wood. The cabinet itself measures 32 inches tall, 26 inches in length, and 16 inches deep. The backboard is recessed 6 inches from the front door and measures 28 inches tall and 24.5 inches wide. The back of the cabinet is recessed almost 9.5 inches, giving me more than ample room to manage cords and mount additional pieces of equipment that I prefer to keep out of view, like my EB8 and my Ecotech battery backup. After receiving my Apex cabinet, I decided to give it a little pop by painting the inside orange and gray to go along with the overall theme of the next build. The inside walls were painted dark gray and the bottom was painted orange. I also purchased these black furniture hole covers from Home Depot. The sizes I went with were 1.5 inches, 2 inches, and 2.5 inch covers. To keep with the paint theme, I decided to paint the covers orange. I saw Farm Boy Reef do this on Instagram and I thought I'd jump on the idea. I purchased some orange Rust-Oleum paint for plastic and laid out the furniture covers. I ended up giving the covers about 3 coats of paint. I removed the door hinges and painted those orange as well with the same spray paint. Then I took the screws that hold in the door hinges and spray painted those with dark gray Rust-Oleum spray paint, just to add a little bit of contrast between the hinges and the screws. Now, I did make some mistakes before I actually mounted my equipment on the Apex stand. The first mistake was painting the cabinet before I mounted the items. In hindsight, I should have drilled first, painted second. Prior to actually drilling into the wood cabinet, I tested my skills on a piece of scrap plywood. I used some 2x4 to prop the board up. I also used some tape to mark out where the scrap plywood would match the measurements to the actual cabinet's backboard. I went ahead and mounted a few pieces of equipment until I felt reasonably comfortable using the power tools and ensuring the furniture hole covers would fit snug. One thing I will say, if the hole saw binds on the wood, the hole saw can stop spinning, but all that force will be transferred into the handle of the drill. So be mindful of this to prevent injury to your wrist caused by the handle forcibly spinning on you. So after a few practice runs with a piece of plywood, I placed the actual cabinet on its back and laid out the pieces of equipment where I thought it would make most sense. After a few different configurations, I finally decided on this, minus the EB8 from the Apex Classic. Obviously, you want to consider the location where the power cords are so that they'll be facing away from the side walls of your stand. The first piece of equipment I installed was the EB832. This install was pretty straightforward. I want to utilize as much of the space on the backboard to prevent unnecessarily taking up much needed real estate. I screwed in the mounting plate and installed the EB832. I actually made some adjustments to the height placement of the EB832 after this video was done. It ended up being a tad too high for my liking, so I lowered it. After mounting the EB832, I figured out where to best drill a hole to later feed the cords into the EB832. The business end of the EB832 is located on the left bottom corner. Of the equipment that I'll be mounting in the stand, the EB832 is going to utilize the thickest and most amount of cords. so I want to make sure that the hole that I was going to drill was plenty big enough to accommodate all the chords. I went with a 2.5 inch hole. If you're going to use furniture covers, match up the furniture cover with the bottom of the hole saw to ensure that they're exactly the same size and that they sit flush with one another. I use this 2.5 inch hole saw to drill into the wood. There are a variety of different types of hole saw bits that you can use. The one I'm using isn't necessarily the best type. Right off the bat, it was giving me some issues. I purchased a hole saw kit from Amazon, which of course was made in China. The price was great, but as I would later find out, it was not worth it. After I punched through the wood, I blew away the dust. I immediately realized this was a big mistake given the fact that the connections to the EB832 were right there and I could potentially get some wood dust inside of it. I fetched my vacuum and used that to suck up the wood dust for the remainder of the holes that I'll be drilling. These were the same steps I took for mounting the rest of the equipment. Another important step I took was ensuring that everything I was mounting was level. I did this by uprighting the cabinet and using a level. I also kept all the equipment 1 inch from the sides of the cabinet, mainly to keep everything looking uniform. The next item I mounted was the Apex head unit. I made some measurements to figure out the placement of the 2 mounting screws that will hold the head unit in place. I knew if I was careful, I'd have enough room to the left of the head unit to mount the FMM module. After a few measurements and marks, I screwed down the 2 screws. Next, I measured out where the bottom center of the head unit is located. Once I figured out the center, I used a 2 inch hole saw and drilled a hole. Mounting the dose pumps was a little tricky. The mounting bracket consists of 2 holes on the back of the unit. Trying to mount this made me really appreciate the removable mounting brackets on the other pieces of equipment. Because the dose pumps do not have a removable bracket, I had to draw out a template. This consisted of placing the dose on a piece of paper and sketching around the body of the dose. I was careful to ensuring the pencil was as close to the edge of the dose in order to make an accurate outline of the dose's body. Once I was done outlining the dose, I flipped over the dose and lined up the outline on the paper with the back of the dose. Once I matched up the outline of the dose, I located the mounting holes on the back of the dose and punched holes into the paper. When I was done, I ended up with an outline of the dose with 2 holes matching up with the 2 mounting holes on the back of the dose. I placed the paper down on the mounting board and used the holes that were in the paper as a guide to indicate where to place the mounting screws. I drilled 2 holes into the mounting board and decided the dose could go up a little higher. I removed the screws and placed the template a bit higher than my first attempt. I screwed in the 2 screws, mounted the dose pumps, uprighted the cabinet, and checked for level. I took my 2 inch made in China hole saw and started drilling the hole after figuring out where center was. As I was drilling and applied some downward pressure on the drill, the stupid drill bit broke and the hole saw went skating across the painted backboard. After pacing around the garage and regaining my composure, I removed the broken drill bit and replaced it to finish drilling the 2 inch hole for the dose pumps. After mounting the FMM module to the left of the Apex head unit, I used a 1.5 inch hole saw to attempt to drill the hole for the FMM chords. As I started to drill, the drill bit I had just installed completely stripped out of the hole saw chuck. The set screw that holds the drill bit into place was completely fried. After throwing a temper tantrum like a 6-year-old little girl, I decided it was a good time to take a break. I headed out to Home Depot where, because of this project, I know all the employee names, their spouses' names, and their favorite foods. I returned home with the Milwaukee hole saw set, threw on the 1.5 inch hole saw, and cut through the wood like butter. The next thing I wanted to mount were the Ecotech drivers. On my past system, the drivers were velcroed onto the back of the stand, however I purchased 2 driver mounts for this project. The drivers are hardwired to the dry side of the circulation pump. Obviously, I'm not going to drill a hole the size of the dry side of the circulation pump to fit the drivers onto the backboard of the Apex cabinet. There are 3 screws on the back of the driver that I loosened up. Once loosened, the back cover can be removed. I removed the dial by simply pulling on it. Then I removed the motherboard, and here I was able to unclip the cord connected to the dry side of the circulation pump. This allowed me to mount the driver and pull the connection through the hole without worrying about the size of the dry side of the pump. The rest of the project was straightforward and went smoothly. A word of caution: when screwing in the older version of the Apex modules, be very careful not to over tighten. These tabs will easily break if over tightened. The modules are very light and only really need 2 screws to hold them into place, but since I had these cool orange screws that I painted, I ended up using all the available screw holes. Although the furniture hole covers fit pretty snug, I used some hot glue to keep them from falling out once I started pulling the cords through them. Hot glue is great because it's not a permanent glue. If needed, you'll be able to later remove the covers by simply working them back and forth. I brought the Apex cabinet upstairs and touched up the damage done by the rogue hole saw with some touch-up paint. The back of the board where the holes were drilled was also pretty messed up. I pulled away the broken pieces of wood and used some touch-up paint here also. I'm really happy with the way the project turned out. I still have about a third of open space to use for any future additions. I think the Apex Triton will look glorious sitting on top of this cabinet. In case some of you were wondering, I'll be mounting the Apex tablet display on top of the cabinet. I want to easily access the tablet without having to open the cabinet door, crouch down, and use the tablet. I'll also be mounting the Apex display head outside the aquarium stand for the same reasons. I'm still undecided where to mount the Apex breakout box, but I'm leaning towards mounting it underneath the aquarium stand for convenience purposes, but I'm not sure yet. The back of the cabinet will be reserved for my EB8 power bar from my old Apex Classic, the Ecotech battery backup, the Apex DDR, and cord management. I do have plans on installing an LED strip inside the Apex cabinet, but that'll be for a later video. So that will do it for this video. If you haven't yet subscribed, I'd appreciate a subscription. Hit that thumbs up if you liked the video, and we'll see you guys next Sunday. Thanks for watching.